He thought the world had already taken everything from him, his home, his health, and even the respect of his own son. But on the hottest day of that Arizona summer, when a forgotten key led a lonely veteran and his old German shepherd to a sun-bleached trailer on the edge of the forest, the truth waiting inside would shatter 50 years of silence. Because sometimes, the past doesn't stay buried. It waits for the one person brave enough to open the door. And when he did, what he found wasn't a memory. It was a message someone tried very hard to erase. Please support us by subscribing to the channel. A slow curtain of dry summer heat pressed over northern Flagstaff, turning the air into something that shimmered like metal above the asphalt. Mike Turner stood on the edge of his once quiet street, a man built from decades of discipline, but now held together by little more than habit and rough endurance. At 55, he had the weathered face of someone who'd served 20 years in the Army, lean jawline, graying stubble, deep lines etched by dust storms, sleepless deployments, and an old explosion in Kandahar. At his feet lay Atlas, his 6-year-old German shepherd, a large black and tan dog with a strong, square muzzle and amber eyes that seemed almost human. Atlas carried himself with a calm vigilance, loyal to the bone, always reading Mike's breathing and tension, as if it were his second language. Together, they watched a new bank agent seal bright orange foreclosure stickers across the front door Mike had walked through thousands of times. Each strip of tape sounded like a verdict. The younger agent, a slim man with a nervous tic, avoided looking directly at Mike. The older agent, a freckled woman with sunburned cheeks, nodded politely before stepping away. Behind them, a navy blue SUV rolled to a slow stop. Evan stepped out, Mike's eldest son, 32, tall, sharp-featured, clean-shaven, dressed like he was heading to a presentation rather than meeting his father. He carried himself with a stiffness that suggested impatience mixed with something unspoken. "Dad," Evan said, his voice clipped and businesslike, "we talked about this. You can't keep living beyond your means." Mike's throat tightened, but he said nothing at first. Evan moved closer, the sunlight catching the sheen of sweat on his temples. Beneath that polished exterior was a young man shaped by ambition and fear. Fear of failure, fear of emotional chaos. His mother's death 5 years earlier had hardened him more than he ever admitted. "I've managed just fine," Mike said quietly. His voice carried gravel, but also wounded pride. Atlas picked up on the tension instantly and shifted his stance. Evan exhaled sharply and held out a single brass key on a faded plastic tag. "There's a place for you. A trailer near the Coconino Forest line. Temporary," he added, but both men knew what it meant. Mike didn't take the key right away. His hand trembled, not from age, but from the weight of being set aside by his own blood. "This isn't helping," he whispered. "You're getting rid of me." Evan's jaw tightened. "I'm trying to help. You're not stable anymore." Atlas let out a low, warning growl. Evan stepped back instantly. "You should control your dog," he said. Mike answered softly. "He's warning you. That's what he does when someone isn't telling the truth." Silence stretched in the thick heat. Cars passed distantly, indifferent to a father being discarded in plain daylight. At last, Evan placed an envelope in Mike's hand. Inside was an address scribbled hastily and a temporary occupancy notice. No apology, no tenderness, just paperwork. "I have another meeting," Evan said. "Take care of yourself." The SUV door shut, the engine roared, and Evan disappeared down the street. Mike stood alone as the heat wrapped around him like punishment. Atlas pressed his head against Mike's leg, trying to steady him. Mike opened the envelope again. The address pointed to a remote patch of land on the forest's edge. He pictured a sun-bleached trailer waiting like an unwanted shadow. Atlas sniffed the air and gave a soft, uneasy whine. It was the sound he made when he sensed a storm no one else could see. Mike crouched and rested a hand on the dog's fur. "Yeah," he murmured. "I don't like it either." The air pulsed, heavy and unrelenting. Mike closed the envelope, lifted the key, and Atlas suddenly lifted his head, ears pointed toward the distant pines, as if something out there was calling them. The late afternoon sun spread a burnt orange glow across the forgotten trailer park as Mike Turner guided his old truck over cracked gravel. The rows of rusted RVs, dented metal containers, and sun-bleached trailers looked like relics left behind by people fleeing a long-forgotten catastrophe. Atlas rode in the passenger seat, alert, ears rotating toward every distant creak and gust. as if the entire place whispered things only he could hear. When Mike parked beside the trailer matching the address Evan had given him, the heat rolled off the ground in wavering sheets. Atlas jumped out before Mike could fully open the door. The German shepherd's paws landed silently on the dusty earth, muscles tensing beneath his thick black and tan coat. He circled the trailer once, then planted himself directly in front of the rickety steps, tail stiff, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. Mike recognized the sound. Atlas never growled unless something was off, something hidden, something wrong. Mike climbed the steps slowly. The trailer was smaller than he expected, the type families abandoned when they couldn't afford repairs. Faded teal paint peeled like sunburned skin, and the tin roof sagged inward as if crushed by years of summer monsoons. He pushed open the door, and a stale breath of trapped heat escaped, carrying the scent of dust, mildew, and the faint metallic tang of rust. Inside, the dimness revealed what Evan had meant by temporary: a thin mattress with a sagging frame, a folded aluminum chair, and a kitchenette stripped down to its bones. But it was the objects scattered across the tiny table that pulled Mike inward. A dented military first aid kit, a green metal bar the size of a shoebox, and an old postcard whose edges had curled from time and neglect. Mike lifted the first aid kit. Inside were gauze pads yellowed at the edges, half-used antiseptic tubes, and a pair of medical shears. They reminded him painfully of his years in service, and of the day an IED tore through his unit in Kandahar, an explosion that took 3 men and left Mike with the scar on his temple and the guilt he still carried like a second heartbeat. Atlas patted inside, nudging Mike's leg gently before moving toward the metal box. The dog sniffed it once, then twice, tail lowering. Mike opened it cautiously. Inside were torn map fragments, pieces of topographical charts that looked hand-marked in red pencil. They fit together poorly, but he recognized part of the Coconino National Forest and a small notation circled in fading ink: Sutter Ridge. He then picked up the postcard. On the front was a washed-out photograph of an old diner with red neon lights that probably went dark decades ago. On the back, written in slanted handwriting from a hand long gone, were the words, "When the sun sets over Sutter Ridge, go beneath the ground. That's where the truth waits." Dated August 12, 1978. Mike frowned. He didn't know anyone who would have had this trailer before him. He didn't know anyone from 1978 who would have written this, and he certainly didn't know why anything in this trailer felt like it had been waiting specifically for him. A sudden bark snapped him from his thoughts. Atlas stood at the doorway, staring out toward the tree line. His stance wasn't one of fear, but recognition, as if he sensed something old, familiar, or calling. When Mike stepped beside him, the dry wind carried the smell of pine, hot dust, and something metallic, something cold, something buried. Across the road, a figure emerged between the rows of empty RVs. Mike tensed instinctively until he recognized that the woman approaching carried no threat in her posture. She was in her late 40s, slender but sturdy, with long chestnut hair tied back loosely and sun-browned skin that suggested she worked outdoors. The woman walked with a quiet, deliberate rhythm, the kind of stride belonging to someone who had lived through her own storms but didn't advertise them. "Evening," she said, stopping a respectful distance away. Her green eyes flicked to Atlas first, then to Mike. "Didn't expect anyone to take that trailer. Folks usually avoid this side of the park." Mike cleared his throat. "Guess I didn't have much choice." She gave a soft, understanding smile. "Name's Nora Bennett. I handle basic maintenance around here. What's left of it, anyway." Her voice carried a warmth, but beneath it lay a thread of loneliness, as if she, too, had been pushed into forgotten corners. Atlas sniffed the air in Nora's direction, but didn't growl. Instead, he approached her, cautious but calm. Nora stiffened for a moment. Fear flickered in her eyes before she controlled it. "Sorry," she murmured. "Just bad history with dogs. Not his fault." Mike studied her expression. Whatever happened to her had left marks not seen on skin. "He won't hurt you," Mike said. "He only reacts to lies." Nora raised an eyebrow. "Then he must find most people exhausting." Mike almost smiled. "Something like that." Nora hesitated, then nodded toward the forest. "If your dog's focused on those woods, he's got good reason. Strange things out that way. Lights at night, old entrances people say belong to mining tunnels. I steer clear." Mike felt the map pieces in his pocket shift as the wind blew again. Sutter Ridge, beneath the ground, truth waiting. And now, a stranger telling him the woods were wrong. "Thanks for the warning," he said quietly. Nora offered a brief nod and walked back toward her small camper, her steps quickening, as if she didn't like staying out after dusk. Atlas pressed against Mike's leg again, eyes locked on the darkening tree line. Something was there, something the dog recognized before Mike ever could, something neither of them were ready to name. Night settled softly over the outskirts of Flagstaff, the summer heat thinning into a cool whisper, drifting down from the San Francisco peaks. Mike Turner moved through the underbrush with slow, practiced caution, guided only by the faint moonlight and the reconstructed map fragments he kept folded in his jacket pocket. Atlas trotted beside him, the 6-year-old German shepherd's powerful frame cutting through the shadows, as though the dog had walked this trail long before tonight. The forest stretched wide and dark around them, each shifting leaf carrying a secret, each gust of wind carrying a whispered warning. Mike paused at a clearing where the brush gave way to a slope of weathered granite. The scattered stones looked recently disturbed, as if something beneath the earth was eager to breathe again. Atlas sniffed along the rocks, his tail stiffening, as he zeroed in on a particular slab near the ridge. The dog dug his paws with sudden force, sending dust and pebbles flying until a hollow metallic thud echoed beneath them. Mike crouched, brushing away the loose earth until a rectangular outline revealed itself. A metal door, half buried, stamped with a military insignia Mike recognized instantly. The emblem belonged to a research unit from the late 1960s, one rumored to have conducted off-the-record testing in these mountains. Mike's father had spoken of that unit only once, and even then with reluctance. Something about unfinished work and orders that never made sense. Now, decades later, the same symbol stared up at Mike from a door that should never have existed in this forest. He gripped to the handle, rust grinding beneath his fingers. The hinges resisted at first, then gave way with a groan that rose like a dying breath. A wave of stale metallic air rolled out, carrying the cold scent of long-sealed secrets and abandoned purpose. Atlas whined, but not in fear, rather in anticipation, as though he understood the importance of whatever hid below. A narrow stairway descended into the bunker. The walls were lined with peeling paint and faded hazard labels. Mike's flashlight revealed dust swirling like tiny ghosts and rusted shelving, holding boxes stamped with dates from 1971 and 1972. Some boxes had been torn open long ago, their contents scattered, but others remained sealed in layers of grime. At the far end of the bunker, a metal desk stood beneath a cracked fluorescent light fixture. Papers were strewn across its surface, and a toppled chair lay beside it, one leg snapped. Atlas padded forward, sniffing carefully, then nudged a stack of folders with his nose. Mike approached, brushing away dust until the faded lettering came into view. Unit Reports, Redacted Operations Project Lodestar. Mike froze. The name triggered an old memory. His father arguing with someone over the phone late at night, whispering the word Lodestar like it was something dangerous, something that should never have been spoken aloud. Mike had been a teenager then, still too young to understand the weight of military secrets and the cost of loyalty. He picked up the top report. Most of the text had been blacked out, leaving only fragmented sentences. Not responsible for the failure. Assigned to blame to protect higher command. No survivors were expected, yet 2. Evidence sealed under Sutter Ridge. Atlas's ears flicked upward as footsteps sounded behind them. Mike spun, flashlight raised, ready to defend, but the beam illuminated an older man standing in the doorway of the bunker entrance. The stranger lifted his hand slowly. "Easy, son. I'm not here to cause trouble." He stepped into the light, revealing a wiry frame wrapped in a worn canvas jacket. His hair was silver and unkempt, with streaks falling across a lined forehead. A short gray beard framed his jaw, and his hazel eyes held both exhaustion and an intense wariness, like a man who had spent years watching shadows rather than people. His name, he revealed in a quiet, gravel-laced voice, was Henry Talbot. Henry explained that he lived in a small, isolated cabin near the ridge and often walked the forest trails at night. He had seen Mike and Atlas heading toward Sutter Ridge earlier and followed, not out of suspicion, but out of concern. People who wandered near this bunker rarely came back unharmed. Mike studied Henry carefully. Everything about him, his guarded posture, the way he scanned the room, the subtle limp in his left leg, spoke of someone with a military past. When asked, Henry did not deny it. He admitted to serving in a logistics division during the same era Mike's father served. A roadside bombing in 1984 had damaged his leg, ending his active duty and leaving him suspicious of anything the government sealed away in forests. As Henry's eyes settled on the Lodestar folders, his jaw tightened. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured. "Whatever truth you think you're chasing, some men died so it'd stay buried." Mike stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "My father served in the unit that was blamed for something they didn't do. I need answers." Henry rubbed his forehead, torn between hesitation and empathy. "I knew your father, briefly. He was a decent man, and he didn't deserve the weight they put on him." The word struck Mike like a blow. Atlas sensed the shift in emotion and pressed against his leg for grounding. Henry sighed deeply. "If you really want to know the truth, the deeper files aren't here." He pointed toward an iron grate half concealed behind collapsed shelving. "The lower chamber, that's where the real reports were kept, but it's sealed shut. Has been since '78. Mike approached the grate. Rust had fused the hinges, but something glinted between the bars, a corner of a metal container similar to the one in his trailer. He reached out, but the gap was too narrow. Atlas leaned forward, nose twitching, tail stiffening. The dog pawed lightly at the grate, then stared at Mike with an urgency the man had learned to trust. Henry shook his head slowly. "If that dog thinks there's something worth digging out, then maybe it's time this place stopped hiding." As Mike knelt beside the grate, the bunker lights flickered. A low rumble echoed through the underground chamber, like something shifting beneath the earth. Atlas growled softly, not in fear, but in warning. Something was waking up in the dark below Sutter Ridge, something that had been waiting a very long time. Mike Turner had barely slept after the discovery beneath Sutter Ridge. By the time morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the trailer, his thoughts were already tumbling. Fragments of Project Lodestar, the memory of his father's strained voice decades ago, and Henry Talbot's warning echoing like gravel underfoot. Atlas paced near the door, muscles tight under his black and tan coat, sensing the tension in the air long before Mike voiced a word. The dog's amber eyes kept flicking toward the window, as if something outside pressed against the walls of the trailer. The sound of tires crunching gravel snapped both their attention. A familiar navy blue SUV rolled into the park. Evan climbed out, slamming the door harder than necessary. Dressed in gray slacks and a pale blue shirt with sleeves rolled up, he looked like a man who lived in boardrooms and conference calls, not trailer parks. But his face, sharp, clean-cut, tense at the jaw, was twisted with controlled fury. He marched toward the trailer without greeting, without hesitation. "Dad," Evan spat before reaching the steps, "I told you not to go digging into that forest nonsense." His voice carried a brittle sharpness, the kind that comes from fear disguised as anger. Evan had always hated the unknown. He hated anything he couldn't measure, file, or explain. He stopped at the bottom of the steps, chest rising with shallow breaths. Mike opened the door slowly. "You shouldn't be here," he said, though part of him was grateful his son had come at all. "We need to talk." "Talk?" Evan snapped. "About what? You disappearing into the woods all night? That old hermit following you around? This whole thing is getting out of hand. You're chasing ghosts, Dad." Atlas stepped forward before Mike could answer, planting himself between them. The dog's fur bristled, and his low growl vibrated through the floorboards. Atlas had never reacted like this to Evan, not once. "Control him," Evan barked, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "He's sensing something you're not saying," Mike replied. "Atlas doesn't growl unless someone's a threat, or lying." Evan's face flushed deep red. "I'm not lying. I'm trying to stop you from embarrassing yourself." Before Mike could respond, another engine revved, then another. 3 vehicles, 2 dusty pickup trucks and a dark green SUV, pulled into the far end of the trailer park. Their windows were tinted, their movements deliberate. They parked in a staggered formation, blocking the only exit road. The first man to step out was tall and lean, maybe mid-40s, with a buzz cut that showed the shape of an old scar running down his scalp. His face was angular, sharp, clean-shaven, with tired blue eyes that flicked across the park like a scanner. He wore dark denim, a charcoal jacket, and a rigid expression that said he was not here for conversation. 2 others followed, a bulky man with a thick brown beard and a shaved head, and a younger woman with cropped black hair, wiry arms, and a tattoo sleeve partly hidden beneath her flannel. They moved with the stiff confidence of people who had trained together, who understood commands without speaking. Evan's anger evaporated, replaced by confusion. Who are they? But Mike already knew. He didn't know their names, but he recognized their type. the same kind of men who guarded classified sites, who obeyed orders without asking questions, who erased inconvenient truths with surgical precision. The details of Project Lodestar whispered in his mind: not responsible, blame assigned, evidence sealed, protect higher command. "They're not here for you," Mike said quietly. "They're here for what I found." The man with the buzz cut stepped forward. "Michael Turner," he said in a cold, even tone, "we need you to hand over any materials, documents, or objects recovered from restricted property." The man's voice held no malice, only emptiness, an emptiness more dangerous than anger. Evan blinked, confused. "Restricted property? What is this?" The woman with the tattoo sleeve glanced at him, but didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed entirely on Mike, calculated, predatory, waiting for movement. Mike stepped back into the trailer. "Atlas," he whispered. "Now." The German shepherd tensed, eyes blazing with warning. The dog's instincts had been screaming since dawn, and now Mike understood why. Buzzcut Man issued a final command. "Mr. Turner, the files, now." Instead of answering, Mike reached for the metal box he'd taken from the bunker. Evan's eyes widened as he realized the situation was far beyond the family argument he had expected. "Dad, what did you get involved in?" Before Mike could respond, Atlas barked sharply, a single explosive sound that made the hair on Mike's neck rise. The dog lunged out the door, not attacking, but forcing Mike to follow. In the chaos, Evan stumbled back, shouting something that got swallowed by the clamor of approaching footsteps. Mike sprinted toward the tree line, the metal box under his arm, Atlas guiding him around brush and fallen logs with uncanny precision. Branches slapped against Mike's arms as he pushed deeper into the forest. His lungs burned, but adrenaline pulled him forward. Behind him, voices rose, footsteps pounded. The strangers were following. When Mike reached a narrow stream cutting between the pines, Atlas suddenly veered left, forcing Mike to follow. The dog led him along an uneven trail where roots twisted like traps, and the forest canopy grew darker, thicker. The shouts behind them faded, replaced by the sound of rushing blood in Mike's ears. "I know," Mike gasped, gripping Atlas's fur for balance. "I know they want the truth hidden. They don't want anyone knowing what happened to my father's unit." Atlas pressed ahead, determined, relentless. As the forest swallowed them whole, Mike felt the truth settle inside him. His father hadn't been just unlucky, he had been silenced. And now they wanted to silence him too. The Arizona heat had softened by late afternoon, leaving the trailer park washed in the warm copper glow of a desert sunset. Long shadows stretched across the dusty gravel, and the scent of sun-baked pine drifted in from the Coconino forest. Mike Turner stood catching his breath as Atlas circled back toward him, fur bristling but eyes alert, the dog's instincts still locked onto whatever danger lingered from the encounter earlier. Mike wiped a streak of sweat from his brow, feeling the weight of the metal box under his arm, like an anchor pulling him toward a past he'd spent half a lifetime trying to bury. When footsteps approached from behind, Atlas spun, low growl rumbling in his chest, but the growl eased when a woman appeared around the corner of a battered RV, moving slowly, hands open, showing no threat. Lydia Grant stepped into the fading light, and for a moment, Mike forgot to breathe. Lydia was in her early 50s, tall and lean, with a deliberate, steady posture shaped by years of military discipline. Her hair, ashen blonde streaked with silver, was tied back in a loose braid, revealing a sun-weathered face lined by experience rather than age. Her skin was tan, the tone of someone who spent little time indoors, and her eyes, sharp hazel with flecks of green, held a kind of calm authority that only came from surviving more than she talked about. Lydia had once served as a combat medic. Her right shoulder bore a faded tattoo of a caduceus with wings, partly concealed by a rolled sleeve. She carried herself with the quiet gravity of someone who had saved lives and lost others, a mixture of compassion and steel forged in years she never spoke about. "Mike Turner?" she asked, her voice low, steady, unmistakably controlled. "You look just like your father." Mike felt his spine stiffen. "You knew him?" Lydia nodded slowly. "Staff Sergeant Raymond Turner trained the medics in my first unit. Hard man to impress. But he had a heart most folks never got to see." She paused, studying Mike the way a medic studies wounds, deeply, thoroughly. Word's been spreading someone cracked open an old military bunker on Sutter Ridge. Figured that someone was you. Mike held the metal box a little tighter. Lydia's gaze flicked to it, Then to Atlas, who watched her with quiet intensity. "I'm not here to take anything from you," she said softly. "I'm here because your father deserved better than the lies printed in that report." Evan appeared then, breathless, dirt on his shirt from scrambling through the brush while following Mike. His expression was shaken, disoriented, as if the world he'd built around certainty had tilted under his feet. "Dad, who is she?" Lydia answered before Mike could. "Someone who saw the aftermath of Project Lodestar. Someone who knows the official story was a fabrication." Evan's face drained of color. "This is crazy. You're talking about classified." Lydia B. cut him off with a calmness that frightened him more than shouting could. "Classified isn't the same as true." Atlas barked once, a sharp, decisive sound, and took off across the gravel toward the far side of the park. His paws churned dust as he sprinted, nose low, tail rigid. Mike followed without hesitation, and Lydia moved with him, her strides long and assured. Evan hesitated, then forced himself to go after them, the confusion on his face shifting into something closer to dread. Atlas stopped in front of a rusted shipping container, positioned behind a row of abandoned vehicles. Its metal sides were scorched from sun exposure, covered in graffiti and patches of peeling red paint. Evan swallowed hard. "I had a crew clean this whole area out 2 weeks ago," he muttered. "This thing was locked. Nobody goes in here." Atlas sniffed along the base, then pawed at a small dent near the lock. Mike leaned down and saw it. Fresh scratches around the latch, signs someone had forced access recently. "Help me open it," Mike said. Lydia stepped forward. Her hands were steady as she braced against the metal and forced the door open with Mike. Hinges screeched in protest before the container gave way, exhaling a stale breath of heat and dust. Inside, everything was cloaked in shadow except for one metal crate resting in the center, its lid sealed with a faded government stamp. Evan stared at it as though it were a live explosive. Mike lifted the crate, muscles straining from its weight. He set it down in the open air and unlatched the corroded locks. Inside were stacks of folder boxes bound with waxed strings, stamped with an insignia none of them had seen in decades. A diagonal lightning bolt insignia, the Lodestar mark. Evan stepped closer, his breath shallow. "These were supposed to be destroyed." "No," Lydia whispered. "They were hidden." She picked up a folder and flipped it open. The sunset washed across her face, turning her expression grim. "This is the original mission record, not the doctored one. This proves your father tried to pull his men out. He reported equipment failure. He flagged the safety breach." Lydia's voice cracked slightly, not with weakness, but with long-buried anger. "They ignored him. Then they blamed him. It's all here." Mike felt something in his chest loosen and tighten all at once. 50 years of silence, shame, and unanswered questions finally had a shape. Evan stood frozen in place, blinking hard. "All this time, Dad, I thought you were losing yourself. I thought you were chasing nonsense. I treated you like—" His voice broke, raw and unguarded. "I was wrong." Atlas nudged Evan's leg gently, almost forgivingly. The young man dropped to one knee and placed a shaky hand on the dog's neck. The evening light swallowed the scene in warm amber, almost too gentle for the truth it revealed. Lydia closed the folder slowly. "This isn't just proof," she murmured. "It's vindication. Your father was made a scapegoat, and someone out there still wants to keep it buried." The sun dipped fully below the mountains, leaving the truth exposed, not just for Mike, but for the son who had doubted him the most. The summer sun over Phoenix carried a dry brilliance, washing the city's government complex in harsh gold as Mike Turner tightened the collar of his only formal shirt. The heat pressed against the concrete like a second skin. Atlas walked beside him, 6 years old, black and tan coat gleaming, posture steady and alert, matching Mike's steps with the calm authority only a well-trained German shepherd could possess. Evan walked a few steps behind, dressed plainly for the first time in years. No expensive suit today, just a wrinkled blue dress shirt and the weight of guilt that had settled on his shoulders since the discovery in the container. Inside the military administrative building, uniformed personnel and civilian officials moved efficiently through the cooled hallways. Among them was Colonel Whitney Hale, the appointed presiding officer of the hearing. She was a woman in her early 60s, short silver hair cut sharply to her jawline, and skin tanned from decades of fieldwork before transitioning to oversight roles. Her angular features and narrow eyes carried an air of formidable intelligence. Rumors said she once survived an ambush in Kabul by dragging 2 wounded soldiers across 3 miles of rocky terrain. Her demeanor now was crisp, disciplined, but not unkind. She studied Mike with quiet calculation as he entered. Lydia Grant was already seated inside, her tall frame straight-backed despite the stiff wooden chair. She wore a clean olive blouse and dark jeans, her silver-streaked braid coiled neatly over her shoulder. She looked every bit the combat medic she once was. Steady hands folded, gaze forward, mind sharp. When Mike took his seat beside her, she gave him a small nod. Evan stood behind them, uncertainty flickering over his face as he tried to find where he belonged in this moment. The hearing room was modest, desert-colored walls, an American flag in the corner, a long table lined with officers, and a projector displaying stamped images of the unaltered Lodestar mission files. The real files, the ones they had pulled from the scorched container in Flagstaff. Colonel Hale began the proceedings with a tone both formal and heavy with history. Today, we are here to review newly recovered evidence concerning the 1979 Lodestar incident and to determine whether Staff Sergeant Raymond Turner was wrongfully held responsible for the mission's failure. She paused, eyes scanning the room. "Mr. Turner, you may speak when ready." Mike rose slowly, palms damp. His voice came out low, but steady. "My father followed protocol. He warned his commanding officers about faulty equipment. He tried to pull his men back. They ignored him. Then they blamed him." He swallowed, throat tight. He carried that shame to his grave. Atlas pressed his head gently against Mike's leg as if anchoring him. Lydia added her testimony next, describing Raymond Turner's meticulous record and the panic among the medics when the mission collapsed due to the ignored safety alerts. Her voice never shook, but her eyes glistened. Old loyalty resurfacing, old wounds reopening. Then came Evan. He stood awkwardly, fingers twitching, as though unsure where to place his hands. He was no longer the polished, dismissive businessman. He was simply a son, stripped of pretense. "I judged my father without knowing the truth," he said. "I dismissed my own dad the same way the military dismissed my grandfather. I was wrong." His voice cracked, unfiltered. "I'm sorry." Colonel Hale listened with a solemn stillness. After reviewing each document, each testimonial, she stepped out briefly with the officers before returning to deliver the verdict. Her voice softened just slightly. "Based on the evidence presented, this military board fully exonerates Staff Sergeant Raymond Turner of wrongdoing. His record will be corrected immediately, his commendations reinstated." She closed the file. "Your father's name is restored, Mr. Turner." Mike didn't move at first. The words took a slow, heavy path into his chest. Then he exhaled, long, quiet, nearly trembling, as the burden he had carried for decades finally released. Atlas nudged him gently again, sensing the shift, tail sweeping against the floor like a quiet celebration. Lydia placed a steady hand on Mike's arm. Evan wiped at his face, trying and failing to hide the relief. After the hearing, a representative from a veterans rehabilitation program approached. He was a stout man in his late 50s, with a round face, trimmed salt and pepper mustache, and gentle blue eyes framed by deep smile lines. His name was Samuel Ortega, a retired Marine who now managed property grants for veterans wrongfully displaced or mishandled by federal programs. "Mr. Turner," Ortega said warmly, shaking his hand with a firm, calloused grip, "given the errors made in your father's case, and in yours, we'd like to offer you a restored ASR under our reclamation initiative. A cabin in the Coconino region, previously unused but in good condition. It's yours if you want it." Mike blinked, stunned. A home, not a trailer meant to cast him aside, not charity. Something earned, something rightfully his. He nodded slowly. "Thank you." Several days later, Mike, Atlas, Lydia, and Evan drove up the winding forest road to the small cabin. Weathered logs, a modest porch, thick pines standing tall behind it. The summer breeze carried a fresh, resinous scent that reminded Mike of childhood memories he'd forgotten he still had. Atlas hopped out first, tail wagging with an excitement that had been rare since their eviction. Evan lingered near the truck, remorse carved into his face. But when Mike walked over, he rested a hand on his son's shoulder, firm, forgiving, wordless. It was enough. Lydia helped Mike inspect the cabin, her steady presence offering reassurance without ever needing to say so. Ortega had provided new keys and a list of supplies. Mike felt something return to him in that moment. Dignity. place, a beginning. As the sun dipped behind the San Francisco peaks, the cabin glowed in hues of gold and rose. Mike stood on the porch with Atlas leaning against his leg, both watching the sky blaze with color. For the first time in years, Mike didn't feel weighed down by the past. Instead, he felt anchored by it, strengthened by truth, surrounded by people who chose to stand with him rather than abandon him. Atlas let out a soft chuff, as if agreeing. The summer evening settled deep and warm. A new chapter waited quietly in the pine-scented air, and Mike Turner, finally restored, was ready to walk into it. Sometimes the greatest miracles arrive quietly, through the loyalty of an old dog, the courage of a wounded heart, or the truth finally brought into the light after decades of darkness. And when Mike stood on that cabin porch with Atlas beside him, watching the summer sun melt into gold across the mountains, he understood something deeper than justice. He had not walked this road alone. For every step of pain, for every unanswered question, for every night when the world felt too heavy to bear, God had placed a guide beside him, sometimes in the shape of a loyal companion, sometimes in the strength to keep moving, and sometimes in the people who returned when he needed them most. And maybe that is the quiet miracle we are meant to carry into our own lives, that even after the harshest seasons, hope can find us again, that no truth stays buried forever, and that the love we give, even when it costs us, always comes back in ways we never expect. If this story touched your heart today, I invite you to share your own miracles in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from and what blessing you are praying for this week. And if you believe in second chances, in healing, and in the quiet ways God moves among us, please subscribe and stay with us for more stories of faith, loyalty, and redemption. May God watch over you, your family, and every step you take, and may He place an Atlas beside you when you need it most.